In the wake of the attack, President Trump is calling for changes to the nation's immigration system. At a cabinet meeting, the president vowed to get rid of the diversity visa lottery program, which allows for a limited number of visas to countries with low levels of immigration to the U.S. Major Garrett reports.
We're going to get rid of this lottery program as soon as possible.
Meeting with his cabinet, President Trump called the New York attacker an animal and urged Congress to end the visa lottery program the suspect used to enter the U.S. in 2010.
Diversity lottery sounds nice. It's not nice. It's not good. We want a merit-based program.
The diversity program was created in 1990 to increase immigration from countries underrepresented in legal entries. At the time, largely those from Europe and the Middle East. Applicants enter a lottery for up to 50,000 visas. They must complete the same background checks as other immigration programs. On Twitter, the president referred to the diversity lottery as a Chuck Schumer beauty. The Senate Minority Leader did support the program when it was signed into law by George Herbert Walker Bush. But in 2013, Schumer was part of a group of senators that unsuccessfully tried to scrap it.
Look, the president ought to stop tweeting and start leading. The American people long for leadership, not divisiveness, not finger pointing, not name calling.
Tennessee Republican Bob Corker agreed.
Yeah, and I don't know that's the way you bring out the best in our country, but everybody has their ways, I guess.
The president also lashed out at prosecutions against terror suspects and said he would consider sending Sayfullo Saipov to the military prison in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
And we need strong justice, much quicker and much stronger than we have right now. Because what we have right now is a joke, and it's a laughingstock.
I want to thank the terrorism prosecutors and investigators in my office.
Just hours later, Saipov was charged in federal court. Acting U.S. Attorney June Kim.
The folks in that unit, working with the FBI, the NYPD, the JTTF, have a long and unblemished track record of successfully investigating and prosecuting domestic and international terrorists.
With Saipov charged in federal court, moving him to Guantanamo appears off the table. Elaine, by way of explanation, the White House said the president was merely venting his frustration and will not be proposing any new methods of prosecuting terrorism cases.
So, Major, that's the White House explanation. As you mentioned, moving the suspect to Gitmo seems to be off the table and that Mr. Trump is merely venting. Could the same be said for the White House's comments about treating Saipov as an enemy combatant?
Well, yes, that's now rendered moot as well, because charging him under existing federal terrorism statutes makes him subject to federal terrorism prosecution, not an enemy combatant. The one advantage of treating him, if the government were to treat him as an enemy combatant, is his Miranda rights would not have to be read. He would not have access to an attorney. Well, that's already been skipped over. He was given his Miranda rights. He waived them. He talked to investigators, as Jeff Begays pointed out in the piece we just ran, was happy with what he did, bragged about what he did, seemed to be inclined to speak to those who were interrogating him. So that whole question of enemy combatant status is also off the table. It feels to us here at the White House, Elaine, that my questions, and I was representing the television pool, so I was the one asking the president about Guantanamo and these other issues, may have expedited the Justice Department's pace in dealing with this case and putting it before civilian authorities and using the pre-existing and well-established, and as we heard the interim U.S. attorney say, highly successful means of prosecuting terrorism cases through the federal courts in motion more rapidly.
Yeah, it was fascinating, Major, to hear the president continuing to respond to your questions during that event, even as his aides clearly wanted him to wrap things up.
Well, they wanted me out of there, that's for sure.
Yes, the tenacious reporter that you are. Moments ago, Major, the president tweeted against chain migration, but the suspect used the diversity visa lottery program, which was passed 27 years ago. You touched on this in your piece. We saw the video of President George H.W. Bush. Give us a little bit more context about the way in which that bill was passed.
Well, first of all, Elaine, let's just talk about the suspect involved, Saipov. He entered through the lottery program legally. He then obtained a green card, meaning he had legal permanent resident status in the United States. When you obtain that status, you can then apply to have relatives of yours also enter the United States. It's a lengthy process, but it can and often is done. The president, when he was meeting with his cabinet today, implied that there were 23 family members of Saipov who had entered the United States subsequently, and suggested that they may be dangerous themselves. So I asked him directly, do you believe they're a threat to the United States, and do you have any intelligence to back that up? The president said they might, leaving it sort of out there that this is a specter of something that we might want to be afraid of. So far, as we know from federal investigators, they have not developed any information of that kind. Not saying it doesn't exist, but when the President of the United States implies it, everyone has to take it seriously until proven otherwise. Now, to your question about this immigration legislation, passed by bipartisan majorities, House and Senate in 1990, signed by President George H.W. Bush. He said at the time this was meant to address three issues. One, legal immigration, creating this lottery system for countries that were, and this is the word that they used at the time, underrepresented in legal immigration flows into the United States at the time this legislation was signed, 1990. What did that mean? That essentially meant most legal immigrants were coming to the country from Asia and Latin America. And this was a legislative attempt through a lottery to give people from Europe and the Middle East at least an opportunity through that lottery system to enter the United States legally. Those were the underrepresented regions, Europe and the Middle East. And many have entered through the lottery program since it was put in place in 1990. Now, the lottery system, when there was a debate in 2013, 2014, 2015 within Congress about comprehensive immigration reform, got a very close look. And Charles Schumer, who was one of its original sponsors in 1990, said, you know what, let's scrap it in exchange for some other things. But that legislation never passed, never got to President Obama's desk, so that idea died. The president sort of skips over all that part, calls the lottery a Democrat idea and a Chuck Schumer beauty, when many, many more lawmakers were involved, and the person who signed it into law, of course, was a Republican president, George Herbert Walker Bush.
Major Garrett at the White House with the news-making questions to the president. Major, thanks so much.
Sure.